This is episode 20 with David Burkus and Mark Laisure. Welcome to the Futures Intelligent Leadership Flowcast. This is your host, Tyler Mongan. I am the president of Haku Global. This is a space for globally minded experts to dialogue about the future of leadership with a focus on the key question, how can leadership be more intelligent about futures? From this conversation, innovative wisdom, practical tools, and actionable insights emerge to help future-ready leaders thrive in an uncertain, complex, and exponentially changing world. Let's jump in to the dialogue. Aloha and welcome to this episode of the Futures Intelligent Leadership Flowcast. This is your host, Tyler Mongan. Today's co-guests are Mark Laisure and David Burkus. Mark is the CEO of Vortex Immersion Media, the world's leading designer of transformative 360-degree immersive entertainment experiences. Mark spent his early career around Wall Street as a principal with firms such as UBS Paine and Wellington Shields & Company, and he's utilized his experience to guide several business startups, takeovers, and turnarounds. Mark is also an inspirational speaker, producer, and co-host of the Life Changes radio show and live event series focused on sharing and embracing change in order to do life better. David is one of the world's leading business thinkers. His forward-thinking ideas and best-selling books are helping leaders and teams do their best work ever. He's the best-selling author of 5 books about business and leadership. His insights on leadership and teamwork have been featured in Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, and BusinessWeek, to name a few. Since 2017, David has been ranked as one of the world's top business thought leaders by Thinkers 50. He is a former business school professor, and Burkus holds a master's degree in organizational psychology and a doctorate in strategic leadership from Regent University. I met Mark several years ago in California, where we were both speaking at the same event. What struck me about Mark was his interesting transition from this financial and mechanistic thinking to a more holistic and energetic focused mindset. This is a theme that is present throughout this dialogue. Another theme we touch on is the importance of leadership authenticity and the ability of leaders to create a sense of safety. Within a climate of uncertainty, complexity, and exponential change, leaders will get things wrong and they will fail to achieve their initial vision, and the vision might change, and that's okay. But they also need to create a safe space for others to fail in the process. And this requires leadership to have the courage to relinquish control over the future vision and allow a collaborative vision to emerge. If you're interested in exploring the role of psychological safety and change, the power of I don't know, how to create collaborative visions of the future, authentic listening and positive authenticity, the power of developing self-discernment in an information world, the power of flexible work environments, and why experts and leaders need to share their thought processes to get buy-in, then this episode is for you. Let's listen. Aloha, David and Mark. Thank you both for joining me today on this episode. And as always, I want to start with this key question of how can leadership be more intelligent about futures, given uncertainty, complexity, and exponential change in the world? And I'd like both of you to answer that from your perspective and your work. And I'd like to start with David.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this a lot because you told me to think about it a lot before we started talking. And I would say, there's this old Yogi Berra quote about predictions are really difficult, especially about the future, right? And the more volatile and uncertain said future gets, the harder prediction gets. And the more I lean on experimentation as the solution, like instead of trying to see it and plan, start to do a lot of different experiments and see which ones have some momentum and then back those. The challenge, I think, for organizations, and then hence the call for leaders, is that experimentation has to be paired with psychological safety. The safety, the feeling of safety that lets people take risks, make mistakes, share what they learned, right? Instead of just having to feel like, leaders will say things that I think are ridiculous, like, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. Like, no, come to me with problems, come to me with experiments. If you found a solution, please share that too. But we all learn if we can experiment, take risks, even when those things make mistakes. And so I think it's incumbent on leaders to encourage that experimentation, but it's not enough to just say that. I think the real thing that you do is you get more experimentation when you start to focus in on building psychological safety among your team and among your whole organization, to let them know you can take risks and you're not going to get fired. You can make mistakes, and please share the learning of that. And that'll help us respond faster to the new reality that we're facing, rather than just try and create a strategy and then have yes men and yes women all the way down.
Great. And Mark, from your perspective, how do you answer the question?
Well, I think that another quote comes to mind. Heraclitus says that the only constant in life is change, and I think I think we tend as leaders to attempt to project that we have things under control, and ultimately surrendering to the possibility and the flexibility and the expectation of change, expecting the unexpected, is first and foremost and paramount. The one thing that I've learned over time through all my experiences is that I know that I don't know anything, and if I approach everything from that perspective, then I have an open mind, an open vessel, the ability to get answers, the ability not to go too deeply into one belief system or response-driven plan, that and maybe getting too far into that plan without flexibility or without the ability to pivot based on change. And that's what we just went through, right? Massive changes daily, daily changes to the narrative, daily changes to opinions, unfolding information and data. Hard to make firm decisions until there's enough of a line of sight to what is driving change, and then therefore what may be the resulting factors. So I try to approach things with as much of an open view and an expectation of those changes.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I'd like to come back to David. I think both of you are hinting at similar things in some way, and the way I'm kind of seeing it is, how do leaders create that psychological safety, especially in contexts where they maybe have to admit they don't know, when maybe people want to have that certainty from a leader, but the leader doesn't know, and maybe they need to share that, maybe they don't. How does that affect psychological safety?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I actually just wrote a piece about that maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and I called it sort of the power of I don't know. We have this weird. My friend actually Tamara Permusic has done a ton of great research in this. That we have this tendency to associate competence in leadership with confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
That charisma means competence, and of course we've seen time and time again that it hasn't. So even as I say that, we think it's ridiculous, but subconsciously we do it, right? And so it encourages leaders to not say I don't know, or I'm sorry, or we need to find the answer. And that was actually something I was thinking about as Mark was talking, was if the only thing is constant is change, and if the smart leaders are the ones that change their mind when they change their when the data changes, the challenge with that is that we so often brand them kind of flip-floppers or unsure, and we seek that kind of confidence, and we don't need that. What we need is truthfully, we need leaders who will say I don't know, and then in doing so it encourages their people to say I don't know. Now that doesn't necessarily mean we can do nothing. I don't know should be follow up with here's how we're going to find the answer, we being maybe the key word there. But yeah, I think you're exactly right, Tyler. I think we need more of that, of saying I don't know, because it'll encourage a lot of people to say I don't know, let's go experiment, let's go find the data we need, let's go find whatever answers we need, instead of everybody just jockeying for position by faking confidence about something that you clearly can't know anything about. We're in the middle of this pandemic that like nobody knew anything about 4 months ago, and yet we're still expecting people to be super confident in their answers. It's kind of ridiculous.
And Mark, from your perspective too, following up on that, how do you think leaders can create that psychological safety within that context of I don't know?
I think David framed it really well. And what word came up for me while he was speaking was authenticity. That I think, especially in a time of uncertainty, the confidence that is looked for doesn't necessarily have to be in the answer, but it has to be in the certainty and the authenticity. So being confident in and authentic, most importantly, about not having all the answers can create a safety in itself, meaning, okay, this is good. At least we're dealing with the truth. Now we can get the right answers. So I think authenticity is key. I agree with everything that David was saying. I think there's so much that's often projected, and and this goes into other. It doesn't have to be crisis driven. It can be in a lot of self help practices or tools for improvement. And if somebody is going down the wrong path in their life, or if a business is being driven down the wrong path, and yet somebody confidently gives them the tools to go down the wrong path, more confidently, they're just further and deeper down that hole. So authenticity, the ability to own the current position, and most importantly, the open eyes to be able to reach out and get as much of a broad input of data to be able to make an educated decision that still has the ability to flex as more data is discovered.
Yeah, great points, Mark. And I know with your work too, you have seen a lot of people go through changes. I'm curious how you see leadership, at least the ones you've worked with and interviewed, how they handle change.
Wow, that's a powerful question, and I've seen and experienced, yes, a lot of change. I've been fortunate enough to be way up and way down multiple times, and on the right and wrong side of major market corrections, and on both sides of many relationships, exchanges, boardroom debates, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems that leaders oftentimes, I think for the most part, have a hard time with change. There's a lot invested in selling themselves and or their belief system or their plan to their company or their peers or their board, and then attachment to that, and an inability to pivot and or to release from the attachment, or an inability to say we missed the mark or we need to recalibrate. That to me seems where many things get stuck, and you end up defending ego and the initial sales or influence that got you in the position, rather than being able to reassess to whatever the factors are authentically, honestly again, and be willing to pull back and reassert a new plan because that's what's best for the whole.
Yeah, and David, any follow-up thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the way in which, my mind goes to for-profit organizations and especially publicly traded companies. I'm thinking about the way in which we often choose leaders at that top level. We want their plan when we interview them, right? The board wants, what is your plan? What is your strategy? If you took this job, what would you do? And the irony is, it's almost impossible. The prior leader didn't even know what to do, and that's why he or she is out, right? And why we're looking for said new leader. So the idea that somebody from the outside looking in would have that answer right away, instead of engaging and listening and fact finding, I think my answer would almost always be, well, I'm going to spend the first 30 days doing nothing because I need to understand the problem, right? I just need to collect all of this information first. And yet, yeah, as Mark was saying, it sort of ties into how we're even choosing people is motivating them, or I guess, giving them the inclination to develop a plan ahead of time and then stick to it, because you're getting judged on whether or not you implemented that plan you got chosen for, even if it's wrong.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. As with this new, this climate, it seems like that we are in right now, it doesn't seem like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? Or is this going to change? Or is this going to be like this new normal where we're going to have rapid changing all the time, a lot of uncertainty, and leadership just has to deal with it more and more?
Yeah, so I'm in the midst of looking at all this, trying to collect as much data as I can, trying to match the results of people's response to surveys about current situation, and also sort of the post-COVID era, and then their actions, which don't always line up. And it's been a little interesting. And I never underestimate the power of humans to just stubbornly want to go back to the way things were, right? Right. But there'll definitely be some things that change. Organizationally, I think this is one of the final cuts, but in this false correlation between presence and productivity, right? Or now responsiveness and productivity. I think we've for the long time labored under this idea that if you're at the office, if the leader can see you, therefore you're more productive. And the irony, of course, is that in the doing the deep work, the deep thinking that really does solve problems and create value, sometimes people need to be away from everything and in doing that deep work alone. And so that means FaceTime kind of can't happen. I hope that's one of the biggest changes that happens, sort of new normal, is this flexibility, not just this sort of work-life balance flexibility, but this realization that we're not asking people to work in the same factory and drill the same hole in the same product every day for 8 hours. We're asking them to actually do a huge bundle of tasks, and the environment or what they need cognitively, even physically, is different in each of those tasks. And my hope is that one of the things that comes out of this is a realization of that, and that will lead us better prepared to experiment and all that sort of thing. But that's probably my only, I don't even want to call it a prediction for what new normal will look like. It's just a hope that we finally break through to that.
Mm. Mark, any follow-up thoughts?
Just expanding on what David says.
Yeah.
I do think that that the short answer to your question is yes. I think it's just going to continue to change. I think change breeds change, and obviously there is no new normal yet. There's an effort to find a new normal. There's an effort to define a new normal, right? There's some camps that want to stay as much as things, in the comfort zone as what was working. There's others that are welcoming it because things weren't working, and suddenly there's an opportunity to establish an entirely new set of rules. So we're in the midst of, I think, the beginnings of massive change, and I think it's going to be systemic. But I think an underlying, maybe not so out front or obvious aspect of this change is the aspect of personal authenticity. In the question before last, David brought up another powerful word, which is listening. And I would actually put those two words that I brought up together. So you got authentic listening. There's a lot of codependent behavior that happens in the workplace where people manipulate and or believe that they're in control of situations because of their presence, or they can energetically disturb a creative process because of their presence. They can control an outcome or influence an outcome. So the ability for individuals to listen to themselves, to function on their own. I think this whole distributed work environment that has been forced on the populace has forced people to look at themselves, how they show up, what they're afraid of, whether or not they're comfortable or not in their environment, and whether or not they feel like there was an artificial sense of control when they were sitting around a conference table, as opposed to being empowered as individuals and trusting that the people around have your back. So there's a psychosocial aspect, as well as the mechanistic aspect of the way communication works and the way the old hierarchies don't work. You get into a kind of a more circular, energetic exchange, and I think it really requires authentic listening and personal accountability.
Following up on that, David, it's like this idea of like a leadership's presence has a lot of influence in a space. And I think a lot of times some of the research shows they set kind of the climate of an organization, especially when people are in the office.
Yeah.
But now with like this shift to more, like hopefully more remote work possibilities, what does that mean for employees and leadership and that kind of dynamic that's not there anymore?
Yeah, I was thinking about that as Mark was talking. All of this literature and all of these books on executive presence, right?
Yes.
Just even we have this false correlation between charisma and confidence, and so then there's this whole body of literature around how to look charismatic and confident, so you can develop that executive presence. Or even if you're terrible at it, like even if you're one of those crazy narcissistic bosses, and the way you would get stuff done is by yelling and screaming, like you can't do that on a Zoom call. Dude will just put you on mute. Like it's not hard to do anymore, right? So, I mean, my hope, again, the line between, for me, hope and predictions is really blurry, but my hope is that this turns into needing a more collaborative leadership style, because you can't physically, you can't control people physically with even coming to that space anymore, but you definitely can't in the room seek to own the room or do any of these nonverbal behaviors that people get trained on at all sorts of crazy camps to like to build that executive presence. I mean, candidly, I was even thinking about like, there's still a correlation up until today between how tall someone is and how likely they are to become a CEO, right? Well, in a Zoom world where we're all little 1-by-1 boxes, how much is that correlation gonna stay, right? So my hope again is that turns into and rewards a more collaborative leadership style, a more authentic style. Mark say authentic listening. I love that term. My hope is that it inspires that, right? If we all just the challenge is that I think we got to balance that with we all. I think are also clamoring for physical presence again. Like we're going to want to be near each other when this is done. So it's going to be this combination of flexibility piece where I think we have a much more flexible work environment rather than everyone's at the office from 8 to 5 or everyone's remote from 8 to 5. It'll be much more flexible, but I hope that still, even though we're going back to some level of physical interaction, it means we can leave a lot of that negative stuff apart and develop that more collaborative leadership style.
I love that. And the collaboration, I think, is, I'm going to add to it, authentic listening and collaboration. Here we go. Where there's a whole process that's unfolding in the current environment.
We're going to develop an acrostic at some point. We're going to figure out how to put the letters and spell a word.
That's right. We're on our way there. But I just learned something maybe just as valuable, which is that I'm going to start making sure I slide to the very top of my Zoom box, so I'm taller than everybody else in the room.
Yeah.
So,
Zoom Charisma 101.
Right.
Angle your camera so that your camera is looking up to you like they should be because you're 6 foot seven. Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. Collaboration, absolutely. Massive. I think that's, again, old systems breaking down, the boss and minion mentality, the worker helper mentality. We're moving into a more tribal, holocratic, without even talking about the formal systems, just the nature of human currency. And I think that's the difference. We're moving into a phase in this environment where suddenly the water boy or girl is just as valuable as the quarterback or the coach. You start looking at each piece of each part of the whole as valued or sacred or whatever word you want to use. I think that's hugely important. And the other thing I think that's subtle, but a big shift. And some of what David was saying reminded me of this, which is there's things that people get away with in the physical space, not only because of their size and stature, maybe their charismatic, energetic persona, but also every call, every meeting is not recorded. Most of these Zoom calls, you're there. There's a certain amount of accountability. There's screenshots. There's, people are not able to have the wiggle room of abusive behaviors, of passive aggressiveness, of abuses of power. So I think that is kind of leveling the playing field a little bit and maybe giving voice to some of the less assertive personalities that have just as much magic or more to bring to the table, but didn't have an open window or an open door to present themselves.
Follow-up thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, so I have two that are very divergent, but I hope I'll bring them together. The first is that, as Mark was talking about the water boy or water girl, I was thinking about. So there's this YouTuber, and I don't want to use that term because before this crisis happened, he wasn't all that good. But there's this guy, his name's Riley Tench. You can look him up on YouTube. He worked the lighting on a Royal Caribbean or cruise ship, right? And was one of the thousands of people that's basically stuck as staff on a cruise ship during this COVID crisis because nobody wants to take these ships in. Well, he had a vlog, a video blog, and it was pretty terrible. And then he posted a video of his basically like mental breakdown about being stuck and being fired and whatever. But then for some reason, he started posting videos more regularly and they were hugely optimistic. And he would talk about the way that the company was taking care of people and he would share like what it's like to live on he turned into, like, in my opinion, the greatest like corporate communications person the cruise industry has, because he's this now sort of excited, optimistic guy, but he's walking through all of, what we're normally just seeing as like memos or highly polished things from the public relations office of the company. And then there's his vlog, which is just like his running around with his iPhone, right? Capturing all this. So yeah, I mean, we were already sort of there, but even in this crisis, it elevates that. The other thing I thought when you said being recorded, I was thinking about, one of the grand dilemmas is it's really easy to look at like political leaders in any country these days, but in pretty much any country, and go, oh my gosh, all of our leaders are doofuses. Look at this gaffe. Look at this dumb thing they said. When in reality, they have cameras on them 24/7, right? And so that would be horrible, because the moment you say something stupid, it gets replayed for 5 days on news cycles everywhere, because it's recorded. And then what Mark made me think about is, oh no, we are all public figures now, right? We're all going to be in that situation that we have to sort of tread really carefully. Again, I mean, that's a positive in the sense that abusive behaviors won't be able to continue. It's potentially a negative too, because I wonder if self-monitoring behaviors will increase, which would lead to a decrease in the negative, but will lead to self-monitoring behaviors as a whole. And we're less authentic in the end, because we're always so worried about how we appear now that we're on camera 24/7.
Yeah, it's a huge point you bring up, David, and I think that it's a complex topic, and we could probably have a whole interview and deep dive around this. But because the flip side of that coin also is the authenticity on the capturing side, right? So just as you said, if somebody there's been such a ferocity about taking information and using it out of context for an alternate agenda, or just by mistake. And yet, if there's a more of a reverence being paid to listening, authentic listening, and authentic retelling, authentic sharing, so that the real true context of the way a person's representing themselves and shows up is what's represented, then both sides of that coin show up authentically. So it's not only the individual, how they're showing up, the fact that they're being recorded, but it's the recorder and the company that owns that data, and being responsible and using it from a of integrity, a place of integrity. So that's a deep topic, and definitely, again, I think I brought it up because it's definitely an encouraged behavioral change that's going on right now, and it's on way to new social norms. And I think you are right. There's going to be many that will fall into I couldn't say this because what if it was used against me, or whatever the case may be. But I think at some point, much like social media, at first everybody's like, oh, I need my privacy. And then suddenly they were sharing, toothbrushing and I'm going to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Then it got to a place of manipulation and misuse. I think that, there's a similar kind of arc of presence, and then of almost ignorance, of kind of forgetting that it's just part of the nature of things, that things are recorded now, or things that you're being viewed. So hopefully somewhere wrapped in that is an encouragement to recognize that if you're showing up, you got to show up authentically, because there may be a byproduct at the other side.
Yeah. And I think I think it'll be a net positive, right? So I'm balancing these two things between all having any gaffe captured and the decrease in those abusive. It's a net positive, but it's a new reality for sure.
Yeah. It seems like it's interesting, because it seems like it's gonna take. There's gonna be some bumps in the road. I mean, I looked at there's a report called the Edelman Trust Report. And they do a report every year. And one of the things they found out is that trust is at a kind of a pretty low in general across the world, with media and companies and governments. And one of the things too that's been attributed to that is like the rise in transparency, right? As we have more cameras on leaders, like we talked about, it's one little mistake can get taken out of context, and then trust starts to dissolve pretty rapidly. As you're talking, we have deep fakes coming, right? And that's going to put even more, like, this ability to really fake the online world even more. And it seems like it's authentic and transparent, but it's actually a fake, right? And I'm curious how do you think leadership can navigate this? Just even as we're just even starting to have this type of transparency of technology.
From my perspective, I think the deep fakes are a speed bump. I think just as that technology has been created, I think the underlying technology that can recognize the movement of the zeros and ones and the changes in the authentic data stream will make it filterable and recognizable element. So I don't know that it's going to be as big of a problem. As much as you see it and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I think the ability to install counter to that will probably happen fairly quickly. But I think this raises a whole different question. What truly is a leader? To David's point, the YouTuber became a leader, right? There's leadership in authenticity. There's leadership in the desire for information that's going to truly impact the whole, or that's trying to bring an element of truth. I think we're in the midst of a shift in consciousness, and whereby, in the past, a lot more of a plan could be installed, or a production could be produced, or a narrative could be spun. I think that people are feeling, closer and closer to their own ability to discern the difference between an authentic leader and an inauthentic leader, and therefore the pendulum will swing as to who's truly getting, some critical mass, and who's being heard and why.
David?
Yes. No, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things I've said for the last couple months or for a while, and I probably stole it from someone who I forget who I stole it from, is there's this weird concept again in that same body of people marketing the executive presence thing. Also talk about leadership as if your job is to cast a vision and then get buy-in, right? Or sell people on the vision or mission. And I don't actually think that's ever been true, but it's never been more not true, which is a weird way to phrase that. But I think, I don't think it's ever been true. I think in reality, what happens is the leaders are the people who put to words the vision or mission that's already on the hearts of people. And that's the reason they choose to follow, right? It's not that I sold you on my vision of the future. It's that you already had a vision like that. And I found a way to put it to words that brought it to the surface level, from your subconscious to your fully conscious. And now you're going, yes, that is what I want. And I think that's never going to be more true, is that's what you can't control the narrative as much. And so your job becomes much more to figure out what the broader vision of that community you're seeking to lead is, and then put it to words, and then outline that path to getting there, rather than trying to control the situation and control the information, et cetera. It's not going to happen. I think the other thing I would say, I'm with you on I never thought about it as a speed bump, but I'm with you on the deep fakes thing. Sort of like photoshopped images, 10 years ago, it then became pretty easy to figure out, to run an algorithm and figure out if it had been doctored. I think, though, we talk about in the university setting. I was a full-time business school professor for a while, and we would talk about how now probably the biggest thing we can teach is information literacy, right? We can you have everything you need to know at your fingertips. You don't need me lecturing at you. What you do need is for me to teach you how to sift through all of that information. And I think we're going to see that for leaders and organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever, is it's going to be much more about not just telling you what to do or telling you how to see the world, but teaching you, this is how we sift through the information and arrive at the conclusion that we did. And therefore, you're now empowered to sift through the disinformation and the true things and find what you need to navigate.
I'm going to reciprocate that. Yes. Absolutely. The ability to reconnect with your own heart's, innate intelligence, with your own intuition. I think, people got, humanity got too used to taking the talking points, to taking what's being served, getting the updates. Here's the news. And now I got the news. Now I need to go act on it, or I got to be upset by it, or be happy about it, et cetera, et cetera. And things were much more trusted. Now, in this age of disinformation, information warfare, the meme-oriented culture, and the multiplicity of agendas, a reconnection to your own sense of what is good for you, and what is good for a person in a certain environment, whether it be work or home, versus another in a completely different environment or a completely different culture, could have completely different set of parameters that that wouldn't be obvious to a larger broadcast of information. So the ability, as David was saying, to be able to sift through the information, in essence, to be able to connect to your own ability to discern, and make accurate decisions for yourself. Self-empowered critical thinking is hopefully one of the positives that come out of this environment.
Great. And I'd like to wrap up to be respectful of time. And one of the things I'd like to do is first to ask you both to share some of your final thoughts after this discussion. So let's start with David.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's my final thought, because it's what we were just talking about. But I think that it's going to be incumbent on leaders or aspiring leaders not just to share, here's where we're going, or here's the plan to respond, but to share the thought process they used to arrive at that, so that the people that follow understand that and agree with that too. I mean, anytime it seems like we've been in in a crazy situation, maybe it's a pandemic, maybe it's something else, you see independent critical thinkers and very quickly they get shouted down and go, well, just listen to the experts. Well, guess what? Experts are wrong sometimes. Not saying they are now, not saying they aren't now. I'm just saying sometimes that happens. And so it'd be better for the experts to teach us all how you got there so that we can reproduce those results and see if they match.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
And Mark?
Authentic listening, collaboration, and being a leader, not a boss. I think that's the more authentic you can show up, the more that you can look people in the eyes and really hear what's happening, and the willingness to admit that something may have been off on the analysis and ability to pivot. The faster you can become unattached and flow a little bit. I think in this environment, especially, flow is so important. I think rigidity is death, and the more that you can step in and guide the team or the family or the business that you're influencing from a flexible place of flow and authenticity, it's a recipe for continued success and momentum.
Great. And final question, maybe difficult, maybe not so difficult, I think, because today we've kind of already found some of these, but what's the one word you'd like to leave future intelligent leadership? I'll start with Mark.
I'm going to return to the word that came up in that last sentence, which is flow. I think pre-planning, post-planning, structural behaviors, the need for accountability, a lot of that worked in the past, but that's more mechanistic. I believe we're now in a more energetic environment, and that's recognizing the energy that you show up to a meeting, that you show up with your team, that you exude when you're receiving information that has material and potentially devastating and or exhilarating impact. The ability to move when things are clearly moving in a direction, and sometimes some of this, especially during the COVID, it's felt like not having an oar in a kayak and going down a whitewater rapid. You kind of got to be able to ride it out, and you got to make decisions along the way. There has to be practicality and accountability, but the ability to flow with it and really sense what is right in this moment for the team as a whole and the individual members. And then ultimately, is that keeping us towards our goals, or potentially is there a way to recalibrate to a new and maybe even a better end goal? Flow would be the word that comes up strongest.
Okay, great. And David?
I'll go back to all the way to the beginning and just say safe. All of that, the experimentation we need, the responses we need, et cetera, they all happen if people feel safe and if leaders feel safe to be themselves. Not if their selves are a jerk. I hope those people don't feel safe. But the ones that are genuinely good humans need to help all of us feel safe to take risks, experiment, share information instead of have the politics and turf wars thing. And if we do that, we'll get through this.
Great. Thank you, Mark and David, for your time, your energy, and your wisdom today. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Very, very grateful to be here. Thank you for having me, Tyler. David, great to connect with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on the Flowcast. To get a summary of today's dialogue, find out more about today's guests, listen to previous episodes, or discover more about Haku Global's neuroscience-based Futures Intelligent Leadership programs or customized strategic foresight and innovation sprints, visit us at www.haku.global. At Haku Global, we believe it is time for more futures intelligent leadership. The future is something we need to think more intelligently and feel more deeply about, so we can collaborate to discover today's solutions for future problems. If you are in a leadership role and need support or training to scale futures intelligence across your organization, then contact us at Haku Global. This is your host, Tyler Mongan, and until next time, have a preferred and conscious future. Aloha.